Finally, a central bank governor designate emerges. Thank you for staying tuned. Welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwawo. Now, last week, the Senate confirmed Mr. Godwin Emefiele as the new governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Mr. Emefiele, until his confirmation, was the managing director of Zenith Bank PLC. Now, the expectation of most finance industry experts and investors, both domestic and foreign, is that Mr. Emefiele will spend the next couple of months on planning, mapping out a blueprint sort of on how to tackle some of the macroeconomic challenges. The central bank, under the leadership of Lamido Sanusi, maintained a tight monetary policy as a measure to stabilize the economy. Now, as Mr. Emefiele assumes office in June, many have wondered what his primary focus should be. And so on this week's edition of the program, we will be setting agenda for him. Interestingly, I had a chat with someone I describe as a renowned economist. He happens to be a two-time Minister of Finance of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu. He believes that Mr. Godwin Emefiele needs to first review the rules and regulations, understand the powers of the central bank, and brush himself up in various macroeconomic aggregates. He also talked about the need for proper coordination between the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. You will get to hear more from him in the course of this program. Please don't go away. We'll be right back. Let's take a quick look at what the screening of Mr. Godwin Emefiele was like last week.
It's the beginning of a new era in the Central Bank of Nigeria. Barring all unforeseen circumstances, the managing director of Zenith Bank, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, is set to be the next CBN governor. But Mr. Emefiele had to pass through one major hurdle, the screening exercise by the Senate. At the proceedings, Mr. Emefiele lays out his vision for the CBN.
We will work very hard to ensure that we achieve macroeconomic stability in the country.
Lawmakers then took him up on several issues.
Yes, it is true that we've seen the reserves dropping, and it is as a result of what I regard or what I call speculative attack on the naira. The speculative attack is coming as a result of the fact that people think that there will be devaluation as a result of what is happening in the world today, for instance, the tapering. But I think, for me, there is no need for anybody to worry about devaluation, because devaluation is a very devastating action to be taken in the country, particularly because we are an import-dependent country.
How or what reforms do you intend to introduce to help boost development of the real sector?
We will try as much as possible to see how we can go into the market, for instance, and raise long-term bonds and debenture. Those funds that we will raise under our intervention, we'll see how we can channel them to some of the companies or institutions in the agricultural sectors.
Do you subscribe to the idea that we should make the central bank governor answerable to the representatives of the Nigerian people?
It is your call. I have made my request. But the important thing is this: let us take decisions that are in line with best practices.
The tenure of a suspended CBN governor, Mr. Sanusi Lamido, would end in June this year. The new CBN governor designate has his work cut out for him as he faces a slowly depreciating naira and high inflation.
Of course, Mr. Emefiele has his plans on what he intends to achieve. But let's hear the views of some economic watchers on what they think the new CBN governor should focus on when he assumes office in June.
The banking sector contributes heavily to the activities in the market, and streamlining the operations in the banking sector will impact positively on the market. The issue of CRR and the likes have been a cause of problem to the banks, and which had been impacted negatively to some extent on the shares of these banks. But with its coming now, we hope that its coming will be a good development for the bank and then impact positively on the shares of on the price of the shares of the banks.
But I think the most important thing right now as we are is how to ensure that our exchanges, well, I will not say we are strong, but remain stable. Once we are able to get that one started, and that is not only him, he might have to work with the fiscal policy authority as well, as in the Minister of Finance, the federal government, to ensure that anything that will make sure that the exchange is stable is achieved. Once that one is achievable, then we can move into the interest rate. I believe that bringing down interest rate will help inflation in the long run.
We will take a short break now, and when we return, you will get to hear from Dr. Kalu Idika-Kalu. He aired his views on the autonomy issue as well as other issues as it concerns the CBN and the economy. To stay with us. We now have a new CBN Governor designate who will assume office in June. Now, what are the first things he should do when he assumes office?
Naturally, the central bank, is a major financial institution. And it is not for want of other words that we refer to it as the apex banking institution. It's a major regulator of the banking sector. So I suppose when you get appointed to that position, the first thing will be to review the rules and regulations. In retrospect, this is very, very important from what we have gone through in the last, 15 years maybe. What are the financial powers of the central bank? Who are your major advisors? Who are manning the major departments? In other words, you look at your personnel to be sure that you familiarize yourself with those who are in charge of the various departments. This is also very important. But I suppose for somebody who is coming from within the system, Mr. Emefiele has been in the system for quite a while, so he will probably be familiar with most of those there. But we still need to look at this. Then, of course, it's to liaise with people in government, both the executive and the legislative. Of course, I'm not suggesting that this will be within the first week. This will be like an agenda, people you need to know, people in the industry, people who are making the rules that affect fiscal policy, because they are also coming in from the financial, banking, fiduciary angles of government regulation. Well, of course, then the next thing, obviously, again, for somebody who's coming from the system, even for somebody who's already in the system, you still need to brush yourself up on the various macro aggregates, what is happening with the financial indices, what is happening in the rail sector, what's happening in the institutions that they oversee, agricultural credit, liquidity, foreign exchange, the whole structure of monetary instruments that are in place at this point in time.
Right, you talked about the need for the incoming CBN governor to understand what his powers are. Now that brings me to the issue of the autonomy of the CBN. That issue has been generating a lot of controversy in the economy. I want to know, what are your thoughts?
Well, I feel very strongly about this, coming from a development perspective. Of course, I've been the finance end twice, and this goes back to the mid-80s. At that time, and even up to now, as a developing country, the emphasis is not so much on autonomy, not because it's not important. It is not fighting for turf, who controls what, who's independent of what. First and foremost, as a developing economy, and we are still a developing economy, there has to be coordination in the strictest sense between those in the Ministry of Finance, those in government and those in the central bank. So it is that coordination, not some sort of rooted in some rivalry. Clearly, finance it should be the center for economic policy, but there has to be liaison with full in cognition with the trends that the central bank wants to set as far as its prime function of fighting inflation, therefore its concerns for government fiscal position, so on and so forth. So I would say that we probably at this onset should not be putting too much emphasis on autonomy for autonomy's sake. Now, the importance of autonomy derives from the powers of those in both arms. People in the finance ministry know where their limits should be, where they should not overreach in trying to match monetary to fiscal. In the same token, the person in central bank has to have an ear for what government is thinking as far as expenditures and deficit levels and foreign exchange expenditure management and so on and so forth from the fiscal angle. So I would say that we need to get back to a position where people are not fighting for tough for the sake of autonomy's sake. As a developing country, we've not got to that state yet where the two can be totally independent.
For some time now, the CBN has taken monetary policy tightening so seriously. They've continued to tighten, the monetary policy and making it difficult for, access to credit. A lot of people are complaining of non-access to credit. Now, do you think the new CBN governor should actually continue with this monetary policy tightening? Well,
once again, you see this concept of balance, whether you're talking about it in physics or biology or the economy, the concept of balance is so critical a factor. You cannot be, you've seen what is happening in other economies. You cannot be tightening for tightening sake. It is the kind of scope, if you like, it's kind of the scope of freedom that allows productive sectors to act because they are fully funded, they are given adequate credit, adequately priced credit with the term structure of those credits. You have to pay attention to what is happening to production and employment. We just listened to the lady who's at the head of the Federal Reserve in the US. And she said, well, there's so much we can do to assist further growth of the American economy, further stabilization, further expansion of the manufacturing that shrunk so much when jobs were lost, productive processes were lost to China, India, some of these countries. So the tightening has to be cognizant of the scope for more growth in the system. And when you are talking about an agricultural sector that is growing maybe 6-7% perhaps, that can grow even higher, maybe a third as high as it is now, not to talk about the structural change within the agricultural sector. How do you influence that structural change? By providing a proper credit to fund such change. And then you come to the manufacturing sector where there's a yawning gap. Well, I'm not surprised that some people thought we should be launching a manufacturing industrial revolution. We need a whole lot of work to do, but to do that, you have to get back to basics. There are people within the central bank working with the ministries concerned who can see areas where additional resources can be provided through government, through monetary policy, through loosening of credit. So it's after you've considered the whole gamut of what the real sector requires, what the broad economy requires, that you can now focus on just tightening.